Welcome and thanks for joining us. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. I'm Laura Sellier and these are the headlines. Qatar says it's suspending its role in hostage negotiations with Hamas as it denies reports it's expelling the terrorist group from its territory. Men chained up, beaten, whipped and forced to wear sacks over their heads. The IDF discovers footage showing Hamas torturing Palestinians. And Yemen's Houthis welcome the killing of 2 Saudi officers by a Yemeni soldier, calling it a sign of things to come. First, Qatar says it's suspending its role in hostage negotiations with Hamas. Doha made the announcement shortly after reports claimed it had told the Hamas leadership that it was no longer welcome in the Gulf state. Doha denied those reports, calling them inaccurate. For over a year now, Qatar, which has long supported and funded Hamas, has failed to make any progress in efforts to secure a deal for the 101 hostages who are still being held in Gaza. Our Lynn Plachmeyer has this report.
Qatar has confirmed that its ceasefire mediation efforts are currently stalled. A statement released by the Qatari Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that the state of Qatar will not accept that mediation be a reason for blackmailing it, as we have witnessed manipulation since the collapse of the first pause and the women and children exchange deal, especially in retreating from obligations agreed upon through mediation and exploiting the continuation of negotiations to justify the continuation of the war to serve narrow political purposes. The Foreign Ministry also denied earlier reports that the country has told the Hamas leadership to leave Qatar per US request. On Sunday, thousands took to the streets of Tel Aviv, marking 400 days since the October 7 onslaught and mass abduction, and demanding the release of all of the hostages.
We have reached the unimaginable 400th day that our loved ones are held captive in the hell that is Gaza. They are still there because of Benjamin Netanyahu. After 400 days, it is time to clearly state on every stage and every media outlet, the war in Gaza must end and all our hostages must be brought home.
Qatar withdrawing is, for us, is a chaos because they were the lead connection to the Hamas leadership in Qatar and the Hamas leadership in Gaza. And now without them, we don't know who's going to be in charge of this.
A hostage relative called on President-elect Donald Trump during the rally to use his influence and save the hostages even before he takes office in January.
The Israeli government gave up on the hostages, and you, the incoming President of the United States, are their and our last hope.
Well, with me in the studio this hour, Yaakov Lapin is the host of the Lapin Assessment on Patreon. He's also a military and strategic affairs analyst at the Miriam Institute and the Jewish News Syndicate. Good to have you with us, Yaakov. Our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran, with us as well. Good to have you, Ariel. So, Yaakov, I mean, what's happening here? Because there were clearly over the weekend some diplomatic sources, perhaps in the Biden administration, putting out the news that the Biden administration had told Doha they need to kick out Hamas. That got picked up around the world. And then today, Qatar kind of trying to get some control back over the situation.
Right. So we heard that narrative that because Hamas turned down this proposal for a mini ceasefire, for a small hostage release deal that would precede a larger one, that really prompted the Biden administration to pull out all the stops and bring down a lot of pressure on Qatar to finally start putting serious pressure on the Hamas terrorists that it has been hosting in luxurious hotels for far too long. So now, you know, Qatar, as usual, is trying to dance at multiple weddings and say different things to different actors. It's trying to preserve its positive image in the West. It's trying to preserve its position as a supporter of Hamas in the Middle East, a critical supporter. And I don't know for how much longer they'll be able to do this deceptive dance, but they're certainly going to keep trying. At the end of the day, Qatar is critical for Hamas. So if they do end up caving to the pressure to oust the Hamas leadership, this will be a blow to the Hamas leadership, and they would have to start looking at alternatives like Iran and perhaps other countries that would host them, but we don't seem to have reached that stage just yet.
Ariel, you think the Qataris are getting a sense that the winds are changing in Washington with Donald Trump coming back for a second term?
Definitely. I think they're trying to bolster their position to try to show that they cannot be taken advantage of, or at least that's the message that they're trying to portray moving forward, that they are not going to be just pawns in this game with no real side showing real openness for a deal. But I definitely think that we should expect a different attitude coming from Doha vis-a-vis its relations with Washington, when we have to remember that Qatar is a strategic site for the United States. It houses the largest American military base in the region, the home of CENTCOM. So even if Qatar isn't quick to expel Hamas leadership, I don't think we should expect any big tensions between the United States and Qatar, but I do think that this is an opportunity to recalibrate the situation moving forward, at least in the eyes of Qatar.
All right, well, let me bring in Dr. Nasser Al-Amari. He's a writer and political commentator. Good to have you with us, Nasser, as always. What is your take then on what's happening with Qatar? Are they kicking out Hamas or not? Is it linked to Donald Trump? And what does it mean for the hostages?
Thank you for having me. I agree with the guests. The winds are changing and they're shifting, not in favor of Qatar. The trio are back. The Netanyahu, bin Salman, MBS, and Trump are back on the scene. And they are back after Israel took strategic action against Hassan Nasrallah and Hamas and Iran. So definitely Qatar has lost a lot in this last bout between Israel and its enemies. So they want to change sides, I believe. They want to maintain the ideology. They want to maintain Al Jazeera and the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood. But they don't want to look like they're allies of Hamas, because that is not politically useful. On the contrary, this is actually very harmful. However, Qatar has embraced this Muslim Brotherhood ideology, probably the only Arab country that is openly pushing for jihad and jihadist thought. But they are smart. They want to continue to play an important role in the American strategy in the region, and they want to, at the same time, they want to maintain this ideology, the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. I don't know if the Trump administration will allow them to play that double role once things become real in the Middle East when it comes to confronting Iran and its allies.
They're smart. They're also phenomenally wealthy, aren't they, in Doha, which has to help. Yaakov, you wanted to come in there.
Well, that's exactly the point. I think their wealth has allowed them to buy unbelievable amounts of influence in the West. We have to look at Qatari funding through the higher education system throughout the West. And the main reason that the United States has its airbase in the Al Udeid airbase, as Ariel was mentioning, was because the Qataris spent hundreds of millions, if not more, dollars on building top-of-the-line facilities, saving the United States the need to invest that money itself. And so there's really, so far, has been almost no limit to the amount of influence that they've been able to buy. And I would just use this as a sort of wake-up call for everybody to look at that influence, look at the influence that the Qataris have been able to purchase with just an endless treasure chest, and most of it has been very, very destructive.
Okay, well, Nasser, let's put the Qataris to one side for the moment, because as you pointed out, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the moderate players in the region are welcoming Donald Trump's return to power. And what about those other American allies, though? What about Jordan? What about Egypt? Given that we know Donald Trump has made it clear he wants bang for his buck, he wants value for money when it comes to these huge subsidies that the United States hands out to these countries.
Well, when it comes to Trump, Trump strikes these regimes in different ways. Jordan is weary of Trump and his talk, of a solution and a settlement of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. He probably leans in the direction of, Jordan being the Palestinian state. However, Saudi Arabia must be celebrating the return of Trump, so does the United Arab Emirates. However, they all have become wiser. They know that American politics changes. They are not sure that the United States is a great ally when it comes to Iran, because they have abandoned these regimes to Iran for almost a decade. Therefore, we have seen how Saudi Arabia continues to negotiate with Iran and distance itself from the Israelis when it comes to all the conflicts going on. So the Arab regimes play a very delicate role here. They want to be pro-American. They want to coordinate with the Israelis because they are their true ally against Iran. However, they do have constituents who are anti-Israeli and anti-American, so they will continue to play this game for as long as they can. However, I think the moment of truth is probably approaching, and that confrontation between the U.S. and Israel on the one hand and Iran and its allies is escalating, and therefore these regimes will probably have to take sides sooner or later.
What about the Palestinians, Nasser? Because we know how Mahmoud Abbas has spoken about Donald Trump in the past. He was extremely angry about Trump's pro-Israel moves, like moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Do you think this could impact who eventually becomes the Palestinian leader?
Things are moving from bad to worse for the Palestinians. The Biden administration wasn't viewed as a friend of the Palestinians, and Trump, who has been tried before with all his initiatives, along with Kushner, who once suggested that Gaza might be a great, wonderful resort. I don't think they believe that Trump is going to be an ally to the Palestinians. However, Trump is unique, and he might actually put something on the table to end this conflict. How that will happen, nobody is sure. However, the Palestinians, after the defeat of, what looks like a defeat to Hamas and Hassan Nasrallah and Hezbollah, I think they are in a very bad situation, and will probably have to negotiate. Mahmoud Abbas will probably have to negotiate more reasonably with Saudi Arabia to find a way out of this catastrophic situation for the Gazans and Palestinians in general.
Nasser Al-Abari, we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, leaders from across the Arab and Islamic world have begun arriving in Saudi Arabia ahead of a major summit that kicks off tomorrow. Emmanuel Onoha looks ahead.
Another summit is about to be held in Saudi Arabia, this time the Arab Islamic Summit to address Israel's offensives in Gaza and in South Lebanon. Various foreign ministers are invited along with the Secretaries General of the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Of note are Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas as well as Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati. The purpose of the meeting is to, quote, initiate immediate international action that seeks to halt the war on Gaza and pressure for a serious political process to achieve lasting, comprehensive peace based on internationally recognized principles. The summit is also a follow-up to a similar summit held in November 2023, a little over a month since the outbreak of the war. With President Trump set to return to the White House in January 2025 and a potential Saudi-Israel normalization deal on the table, Saudi Arabia might be seizing a second wind to pave a way to peace.
Well, amid those reports that Qatar is mulling expelling Hamas from its territory, the IDF has released footage which shows Hamas officials torturing ordinary Palestinian civilians before the war. Thousands of hours of CCTV video was discovered in the Jabalia district of North Gaza. It shows men being chained up, whipped and beaten, often with sacks over their heads. More in this report, which we warn some viewers may find disturbing.
Shackled, with hoods on their heads, and beaten with rubber hoses. This is how Hamas brutally tortures its own civilians in the Gaza Strip. The IDF released 46 minutes of footage it found in a Hamas internal security compound in northern Gaza's Jabalia, documenting severe abuse of Palestinians under their rule. The materials, dated between 2018 and 2020, reveal Hamas's brutal methods of interrogating civilians while violating the human rights of Palestinians suspected of dissent or collaboration with Israel. Over the past year, there have been increasing testimonies by Gazans who were tortured by Hamas's internal security.
فاتفاجأت أول ما دخلت في المستشفى في القسم الغربي، أخذوني جوا وعذبوني وبهدلوني وضلوا يضربوا فيا بالبرابيش وعلقوا إيدي وعلقوا رجلي في.
It is unclear why the men in the footage were being held, but human rights groups have long warned of abuses by Hamas against Gaza's civilian population, whether suspected for collaborating with Israel or for homosexuality, which in Gaza could be punishable by death. 2 years ago, I-24 News brought an exclusive testimony of a young Gazan who fled to Turkey after being tortured by Hamas for being gay.
أكتر أنواع التعذيب، يعني في نوع من التعذيب يرفع رجليا، حط عصاية بينهم يضربوا على رجليا. وحصل بعد كمان سنة كل مرة كانوا يعتقلوني، كانوا يقوموا بتعذيبي بنفس الطريقة.
In recent months, there has been a surge of videos emerging from Gaza of Hamas's abuse and brutality against its own people. Whether to prevent theft of aid or to clamp down its rule, Hamas's brutality knows no boundaries, including against its own suffering people.
Well, my next guest knows more than most about just how sadistic Hamas can be. Hamza Hawadi is a Palestinian peace activist. He managed to escape Gaza and he joins us now. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Hamza. We appreciate it. And first of all, I've seen that you've written on social media today about how personally upset you are about seeing this footage and about the media coverage because you yourself have experienced torture at the hands of Hamas. Can you tell us a bit about your story, about what happened to you?
First of all, thanks for having me. Actually, when I was first saw the news about the videos published, that took me back like 5 years ago when I was in the same place where those people were being tortured. And for many reasons, not only the homosexuality, but there were more than 3,000 people who were arrested simply because they went in a protest and said, we want to live. And the most saddening thing about those videos published that we are seeing the pro-Palestinian movement, or most of them in the diaspora, ignoring these videos and going to chant and glorify this regime, the same regime that tortured thousands of Gazans.
So you took part in protests, peaceful protests against Hamas many years ago, and for that reason you were tortured.
Yes, I was tortured in the same place where you saw the videos in 2019, and I was tortured again in 2023, but in a different place in the Gaza Strip.
Wow. Look, Hamza, we rarely hear, I mean, I think the last time that we saw an NGO or a charity speak out about this was back in 2014. That was Amnesty International. But you don't tend to hear the NGOs speaking out about this at all. And they are very tuned in to Palestinian suffering. Why do you think that is? Do they not know about it? Does it not fit their narrative? What is your take on that?
Actually, that was the main reason why I left the Strip, because when we were released, or when we bribed Hamas to get out of the jail, we noticed that there was no human rights organization to talk about what happened to us and the people who stayed in these jails. Even the media were ignoring these videos simply because they do not want to disrupt the narrative, the freedom fighters narrative or the resistance narrative. They don't want to disrupt that, and they are willing to ignore the death and torture and killing of thousands of Palestinians simply for this reason.
A lot of people in Israel are wondering, why don't the people in Gaza stand up to Hamas? Why don't they end this war? Why won't Hamas surrender? I mean, these videos, is that a key to why ordinary Palestinians just simply can't stand up to Hamas because they are so terrified of them?
Exactly. I mean, Hamas killed many Palestinians simply because they said we want to live. Other Palestinians, like Issam Safin, for example, was killed simply because he was working with the Palestinian Authority, and this might ensure a death sentence under Hamas's rule. So it's not easy to protest and stand against Hamas when there is a gun pointed to your head. People need security to do this riot against Hamas.
Is it still like that now, even after the war, and Hamas has lost so many of its fighters, so many of its commanders? Well, Sinwar himself is dead. Is there still this culture of fear and intimidation, would you say?
Yes, and the proof about that is that the IDF is still fighting Hamas. If the IDF with their full army, with their tanks, The airstrikes, they couldn't defeat Hamas until the moment, or at least they couldn't release the hostages. So you can imagine if civilians are going to do this job without any gun or without any security, that would ensure a death sentence for many of them.
And just take us back to 2006 when Hamas came to power, and we know there was a very violent beginning to their rule in Gaza, and they murdered all of their opponents in Fatah. Was it like this right from the beginning? Have they always treated Palestinians like this?
Actually, when I saw the atrocities of October the 7th and how Hamas killed many Israeli civilians, how they dragged them, how they took them to the Gaza Strip, I remembered what happened in 2007, because that was the exact same scenario. They took the Fatah members, they throw them from top roofs, or drag them with motorcycles. They did exactly the same way what they did to the Israeli civilians.
I mean, we were reading about it today. They torture gay men, they torture men they suspect of adultery. You know, it's all tied in with a very strict interpretation of Islam. I'm wondering, how do you feel when you see people who describe themselves as progressives marching in Western capitals alongside those Hamas flags?
Actually, if I can describe that in a single word, I would say betrayal, because we thought that those people are going to back us. They would care about the fate of the Palestinians. It's clear what they care about is the anti-Israeli movement, which is not benefiting the Palestinian people at first.
Wow, well, Hamza, we're glad you're safe now, and I hope you can have some peace going forward. Hamza Hawadi, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yaakov Lapin and Ariel Osseran with me in the studio. And Ariel, you watched a lot of that footage today when you were putting that report together. It's really shocking, isn't it? And you don't hear about this from the NGOs and from the charities.
That's, I think, what's most shocking about this. I mean, look, it's not surprising that Hamas engages in these tactics. I mean, Sinwar was known. What got him the nickname, the Butcher from Khan Yunis, is not what he planned or did to Israelis, but rather what he did to his own people. The tactics, the brutal tactics that he would use in order to uncover dissidents, uncover collaborations with Israel, even just people he suspected. I mean, these videos are coming out. They constantly come out, whether it's from Gaza or from the West Bank. Hamas employs the same brutal tactics to clamp down on anything that it sees as a threat to its rule. And that's why all this talk about the day after, about an alternative, this is critical even to this day, because we're seeing how Hamas is maintaining its own rule internally. I will just note that there's no surprise to that, but Hamas denying the authenticity of these videos that have showed a year's worth of brutal torturing, calling it fabricated.
Right, and I mean, Yaakov, this is baked into Hamas's DNA, isn't it? And this is why people say if there was a Palestinian state right now, it would be taken over by these very brutal, very vicious people.
Yeah, and really Gaza was that experiment. You know, we saw that Gaza had every chance at independence, and then Hamas comes in and takes it over, and really just applied years of repressive, psychopathic violence. It was basically like an Islamist mafia that was very happy to traumatize its own people and repress them and terrorize them into submission as it was preparing over the years a mass murder attack on the Israeli people. It's a culture of death. That's what Hamas represents, and that's why it must never, ever again be allowed to rule other Palestinians and to threaten Israelis in the future.
And this is a point that, as I've just pointed out in my interview with Hamza, is completely lost on those Westerners who are marching alongside Hamas flags week after week. It's astonishing.
Yeah, they're living in a parallel universe in which Hamas are some sort of, noble representative of an anti-colonialist movement rather than the agents of a murderous genocidal jihad. The facts don't interest these people, don't reach these people. It's absurd beyond description. I think we've gotten so used to it that we sort of take it as a given, but it is absolutely bonkers that ultra-progressives are becoming the flag bearers for one of the darkest, most repressive and violent Islamist movements in the Middle East, which brought untold suffering on both Israelis and Palestinians.
And Yaakov, just circling back to what we were talking about at the beginning, about Qatar possibly kicking what's left of the Hamas leadership out of Doha. I mean, is that is that likely to push the group towards surrender? Will it have no impact at all? Where are we in terms of the status of Hamas at this point?
It's very tough to call. I personally don't think that it's going to be the thing that breaks the back, so to speak, of Hamas's tough bargaining position. I think that the thing that Hamas fears most is being made irrelevant to Gaza's future. They want to return to the position of being the regime, the controlling regime of the Gaza Strip. And I think everything they're doing now is aimed at ensuring their future in Gaza, including this hardline, maximalist demands, the negotiations with Israel over the hostages. That's their way, in my view, of signaling to Gazans that they're a part of Gaza's future. And therefore, I think that the thing that can really, let's say, strike fear into the hearts of Hamas's leadership, what's left of it, is to start making moves to make them irrelevant politically. That means distribution of aid. That means setting up an alternative administration, talking about Gaza's political future. That could soften their position. I'm sure that a Qatari ouster, if it happens, will be very unpleasant for them, but I'm not sure that that's the thing that would cause them to change their negotiation position.
And we'll have to see which country would accept them after that. I mean, I know Algeria has been spoken about.
Algeria, Turkey, Iran. Unfortunately, these guys don't have a short list of friends.
Okay. All right, let's take a short break. Thank you both. When we come back, 2 people wounded in Hezbollah rocket attacks on the north of Israel today as the IDF reportedly carries out airstrikes in Damascus. We'll have more on that next. Stay with us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Welcome back. At least 3 people were wounded today in the Galilee region of northern Israel after the latest barrage of Hezbollah rocket fire. Let's get more with our Zach Andrews, who joins us now from the north of Israel. Zach, what's happening?
Yeah, the total is now up to, forgive me, I've got a bit of a cold. The total is now up to 6 total injured here in the north, and this is from separate attacks that we've been tracking throughout the day. We've also noted that at the 5 o'clock hour, there was red alarms in Haifa. This appears to have been another drone, and from the video that we get outside Haifa off the bay, the helicopters that were already in the air appear to engage the target, engage the drone, and that's a change we've noticed over the last month, trying to make up for the shortcomings of the air defense systems, not being able to identify and target these drones. So instead, these attack helicopters have been on station off the coastline nearly 24/7, engaging the drones when they do come across the border. And I believe that's, again, what we saw here tonight. So 6 in total injured. It does not appear that right now these are serious injuries, although we do know that some people have been taken for treatment to nearby medical centers. In Lebanon, it's a much different picture. We have noted serious heavy airstrikes taking place, not just near the border, but also once again in Beirut, this time not in the southern suburbs, but in the north of the city of Beirut, with dozens reported as casualties in a strike there. It's not entirely clear what exactly the target was in this Beirut strike as of now. And then as you shift over into Syria and into Damascus, the capital city, also another serious airstrike, another 24 plus reported as wounded, several dead, including women and children, according to Syrian state media, in a targeting which we're now beginning, and we're relying here primarily on Saudi reports, but it does appear that the intended target was a Hezbollah man known for his involvement in the assassination and car bombing in Beirut back in the mid-2000s that killed the former Prime Minister of Lebanon at the time. This man was then charged in absentia, held by an international criminal court, and then basically protected by Hezbollah for after the sentencing. It's believed that he was the intended target inside Damascus, with Saudi channels reporting he was killed.
Zach, thank you very much. Our Zach Andrews there in the north. With me in the studio this hour, Yaakov Lapin, host of the Lapin Assessment on Patreon, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran. And just a quick clarification about something Zach was referring to.
Yeah, so the Hezbollah operative who was responsible for the killing of Rafik Hariri, Salim Ayash, he was believed to have been eliminated in an Israeli airstrike in Homs at the beginning of the month. This is starting to come out now, Saudi media, but also specifically regarding this strike in Damascus today, Saida Zainab area, a Hezbollah pro-Iranian stronghold in the Syrian capital. The target there is believed to be Ali Musa Dakduk. He's responsible for the Golan file operations in Iraq. And interestingly enough, Dakduk's son was also killed by Israel in clashes. And so first to split those 2 targets. But as Zach said, we do see that Israel continuing to operate in Syria, in Damascus, and all this.
Taking out the senior Hezbollah leadership that remains.
You'd be surprised that some are remaining, but there are those who are remaining, mainly taking out those with combat experience that goes back decades. This is going to limit the group's capability to regroup. All
right, well, let's zoom out a little bit, because incoming President Donald Trump says he wants the Lebanese war wrapped up by Inauguration Day on January 20th. There are some reports that Hezbollah is interested in a ceasefire.
So Hezbollah talking to Saudi media this evening, saying that they're going for all the details in the agreement that was published by Israel's Israel Hayom for a ceasefire agreement, besides one that would be a continuous Israeli presence in southern Lebanon. But what are they agreeing to, according to these reports? They're agreeing to withdraw their forces, this is Hezbollah, north of the Litani River, to enable the Lebanese military to destroy and dismantle their terror infrastructure south of Al-Litani. Also a commitment to not regroup, rearm moving forward. This is something that will be enforced by the Syrian government. That raises a few questions. But to push this forward, this is the details report of the agreement reported in Israel Hayom. Ron Dermer is in Russia now to discuss the Syrian element of this, because obviously when you talk about Syria, you talk about Russia. And after that, he's going to go to the United States and meet with President-elect Trump to show, and this is proof that they're really trying to push forward a deal even before the inauguration of the next 47th president.
All right, Aaron, I know you've got to fly. Thank you very much indeed, Aaron Lusser, around there. Well, as Hezbollah continues to attack Israel, a reminder, its missiles do not discriminate. On Friday, one of them caused significant damage in the Arab village of Kafr Yassif, partially destroying the apartment of Christian Arab citizen Samuel Daoud. More in this report.
In the Arab-Israeli village of Kafr Yassif in northern Israel, the night brings a somber stillness, broken by the aftermath of yet another rocket attack. A missile launched from Lebanon has left its mark, tearing through the roof of Samuel Daoud's home, an Arab Christian family's sanctuary now turned to rubble. Police search the ground for any remains of the rocket, fragments left scattered where moments of everyday life once unfolded. The strike spared lives but left behind destruction, piercing the walls and floors of 3 apartments. Through broken glass and torn walls, a Christian image resting among the destruction, a quiet reminder of the diverse lives touched by the war.
I was in the apartment on the other side when the missile hit. God protected us. There were no casualties, but the missile pierced through the ceiling, carving through 3 stories of our building.
Samuel's home is just one of many impacted by the violence that has surged across Israel's north, where Hezbollah's rockets have been causing destruction for over a year. For Samuel, the answer lies in peace.
This war must end, not because a rocket hit my home, but because history shows us that all wars end at the negotiating table. Why wait for tomorrow, when the suffering can end today?
Since October, Hezbollah's rockets have rained down on northern Israel in a show of solidarity with Hamas in Gaza. The rockets don't discriminate. They touch all kinds of lives, leaving the scars of conflict on families like the Daouds, whose only wish now is for an end to the violence.
Well, to talk a bit more about the future of the war between Israel and Hezbollah, Yaakov Lapin is with us. First of all, Yaakov, there's a new poll out today which shows that Israelis themselves are deeply divided over whether to continue the fighting with Hezbollah, which has been going on for over a year now, or to seek some kind of ceasefire agreement. 46% each way, pretty much. How do you explain that?
Right. Well, I think, there's a little bit of confusion over what ending the war actually means, because at the end of the day, what's happened is that Israel has created a new reality in southern Lebanon, one in which Hezbollah can no longer launch a mass murder attack from southern Lebanese Shiite villages. The entire Radwan Conquer the Galilee plan, which was a huge threat hanging over the north, has been eliminated thanks to this ground maneuver. And most of Hezbollah's rocket arsenal has been eliminated, 80% according to Israeli assessments, through a series of really incredible Israeli Air Force airstrikes over the past several weeks. So the dilemma now is whether to go for a ceasefire or to deepen the maneuver. And I think it's a completely legitimate debate, but one thing that's missing from it is the concept of what will happen when Hezbollah tries to crawl back into southern Lebanon. And that's where I think it's going to be important what Israel does. Whatever happens, whether this part of the war in Lebanon ends now or whether it ends in a month, I think in either scenario, what really matters is how Israel will enforce and preserve its achievements and not go back to the reality that existed here after the 2006 Second Lebanon War. That reality was intolerable, allowing them to just build up their force with Iranian assistance. That's the thing that has to change going forward. That's the most important thing whenever this war ends.
And one of the concerns Israel had in terms of the fight with Hezbollah is that it was the pressure from Washington. The Biden administration did not want to see widespread destruction in Lebanon, and it was sitting on some weapons deliveries. We've got another report today that the Biden administration is holding up a shipment of armoured bulldozers. This would not be for the north, this would be for the fighting in Gaza. But is that a sign, do you think, of what we might expect from the Biden administration over the last few weeks that it's in power?
It could well be, because, they have been holding this threat of an arms embargo, partial, full, official, unofficial, all versions of this, threat have been presented to the Israeli decision makers constantly during this war. I personally find that very troubling. It has been very disturbing that it's even a threat. I don't think an ally should be threatening an ally that's fighting for its existence with arms embargoes, even if there are disagreements about policies. So I think that this is something that over the next 2 months, the Israeli cabinet and military will have to be on the lookout for. It's definitely something that could increase. We also know about this letter that was, made public, that was signed by the U.S. Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, saying there will be an arms embargo if in the next 30 days conditions don't change in northern Gaza. This is even despite the fact that, the IDF has released every single day images and data about dozens of trucks moving food and aid into northern Gaza as they evacuate civilians out of Jabalia to Al-Mawasi, the humanitarian zone. So there really seems to just be this disconnect, and it's being backed up by threats. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see more and more of those threats as the Biden administration enters its final couple of months.
All right, Yaakov, for now, thank you. The United States says its warplanes carried out strikes on the Houthis in Yemen last night, targeting advanced weapons storage facilities. Meanwhile, in Houthi-controlled Sana'a, protesters turned out to show their dismay at the US election result. Jody Notilovitz has more.
Our correspondent confirmed that last night, American-British warplanes launched an airstrike on Al-Hafa in the Al-Sabin district, 4 airstrikes on the Jarban area in the Sanhan district, and 2 airstrikes on the Sufyan district in Amran. The Palestinian Mujahideen movement strongly condemned the new American-British aggression against Yemen.
According to the main television news outlet run by the Iran-backed Houthi movement, the United States and Britain have launched air raids on several areas across Yemen, including the Amran Governorate and the capital city, Sana'a, Saturday night. U.S. defense officials cited that the strikes had targeted weapons facilities holding advanced conventional weapons. The weapons had been used to target ships in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, disrupting global trade as ship owners have had to reroute vessels to sail the longer route around the southern tip of Africa. Iran-aligned Houthi militants have been launching attacks on international shipping near Yemen since November last year, in solidarity with the Palestinians in Israel's war with Hamas, attacks that have drawn U.S. and British retaliatory strikes. In mid-October, after more than a year of attacks on U.S. and international vessels, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin announced that the U.S. struck the militant group using stealth B-2 bombers for the first time. Austin said he authorized the strikes to further degrade the Houthis' capabilities. The strikes on Yemen come days after the group's leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, criticized U.S. President-elect Donald Trump for supporting Israel.
American presidents compete over who will provide more services to the Israeli enemy and the Zionist project.
Adding that normalization deals between Arab countries and Israel brokered by Trump had failed to bring an end to the Middle East conflict. Friday saw thousands of protesters gathered in Yemen's capital, voicing doubt that Donald Trump's return to the White House would bring any significant policy shifts in the region.
And staying with Yemen, a soldier for the country's exiled government opened fire on Saudi troops as they were taking part in a drill in the east of the country, an area that's not under Houthi control. 2 Saudi officers were killed and another wounded. The Houthis did not claim responsibility for the attack, but they praised it as what they called the beginning of a harsh future awaiting the invaders. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Simon Henderson, Saudi expert and director of the Gulf and Energy Policy Program at the Washington Institute. Thank you for being with us, Simon. Good to see you again. So, I mean, first of all, the Saudi troops are in Yemen, aren't they, as part of this 2-year-old ceasefire agreement between the Saudi-led coalition and the Houthis. So what exactly happened here? Because they are supposed to be on the same side, aren't they?
Yemen is essentially divided between the northwest of the country around the capital Sana'a, which is Houthi-controlled, and it's where most of the population live. Way to the east, the Houthis don't have control, and this is where the attack took place. The incident involved Saudi forces who were killed and injured, and the perpetrator was an individual Yemeni soldier who was serving in that area, not as a Houthi, but as the sort of exile government, which is Saudi-influenced, Saudi-controlled. What's more interesting, perhaps, is today the Saudi chief of army staff is in Tehran to have talks with his Iranian counterpart to see, goodness knows what they're going to talk about, because the agenda is mostly to do with differences rather than common areas. It'll be fascinating to eventually learn, if we ever can, how this incident in Yemen was tackled in the conversation.
Well, quite. I mean, how does that meeting fit in with the re-election of Donald Trump in the United States, an election victory that has been warmly welcomed in Riyadh?
Good question. These sort of meetings don't happen that quickly, so I would imagine it was being planned before last Tuesday, November the 5th, when polling took place. The interesting thing it is that it wasn't cancelled because of the deaths of Saudi forces. It's an indication that all the assumptions about Washington's relations with the Middle East and its view on how to deal with issues, it had been thrown up in the air because of the Trump election victory. Which is not only that he's becoming president again, but the swing against the Democrats, both in the Senate and the House and in the popular vote, has been very significant. Everybody is essentially holding their breath. And the Iranians, too, must be very concerned about what might happen. Hence the invitation to the Saudi military commander.
What do you think the Saudis are expecting from the incoming Trump administration?
Trump has a reputation of wanting to deal with issues. And in dealing with issues, he comes up, or the people around him come up with ideas, and they want to push through to get results. This is contrary to the Biden tradition of diplomacy, quiet diplomacy. There are meetings going on, but we don't know what's happening, and differences don't appear to be worked out that quickly. So everybody's waiting for surprising suggestions, and suggestions which might have appeared ridiculous a month ago have to be dusted off, because they might become the new reality of the new Trump administration.
Simon, great to talk to you. Thank you very much. Simon Henderson there at the Washington Institute.
Thank you.
And Yaakov Lapin is with me in the studio. And the Saudis were considered one of the big winners of Trump's victory in the United States. Just your thoughts on how this could move on from here in terms of relationships between the United States and Saudi Arabia, and also, of course, with Israel as well.
Right. So, I think that a lot of this has to do with the way the Saudis view the Biden administration and what they view will be the difference that they will receive in treatment from the Trump administration. The Saudis viewed, I think, intrinsically the Biden administration as hostile, as critical, and probably worst of all from their perspective, as willing to contain Iran and not take action against Iran or its proxies. And, we just talked about the attack, the allied British-American attack on the Houthis. That attack in itself is, of course, welcome. But when you look at the overall action against the Houthis have challenged international waterways. They have harmed the economy not only of Israel, of Jordan, whose only port is Aqaba in the Red Sea. Egypt and the Suez Canal have suffered. That's a source of, part of Egypt's GDP. all of these countries and the entire actual global order has been challenged by Iran activating the Houthis to disrupt international trade and forcing ships to sail around Africa. And we've seen a minimal response. And it's that kind of meek response to the Iranian challenge to the U.S.-led world order, including in the Middle East, I think that the Saudis are most fearful of. That's why they've been engaging, I think, in diplomacy with Iran to attempt to de-escalate. And now that Trump is coming in, I think they're going to be building up hopes of a change, of a firmer stance. And when you couple that with Israel's own serious gains against the Iranian access, I think the Saudis are more optimistic than they have been in a long time.
And just real quick, because the last time I spoke to you, you said that most Israelis were hoping that Mike Pompeo would be making a return as Secretary of State. He's not. Trump said that neither Pompeo nor Nikki Haley will feature in his cabinet. What do you think of the appointments we're hearing about so far? Brian Hook on the Iran dossier, Susie Wiles. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that, regarding Hook, Brian Hook, he's very knowledgeable about the region. He has a lot of experience. His recent statements about, the threat posed by Iran and its proxies have been promising. I think that he is a good appointment. I don't know much about Susan, so I'm not going to weigh in on that. But at the end of the day, Brian Hook is definitely a positive appointment for the region, for the Saudis, for Israel, and we'll have to see who else he surrounds himself with.
Yeah, we've got Trump's son on social media tweeting how he doesn't want to see any neocons in the cabinet. So we'll have to see how all of that plays out, won't we? Yaakov, right. Great to talk to you as always. Thank you very much, Yaakov Lapin there. Now, looking a bit further afield, dozens of people were killed in a suicide bombing today at a train station in the southwest of Pakistan. A separatist group known as the Baloch Liberation Army claimed responsibility. The Baloch people claimed territory across large parts of Pakistan, but also Iran. Well, for more on that, we are joined from Karachi by Imtiaz Mir. He's the chief international anchor of Metro One News and Awaz News, both based in Karachi in Pakistan. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Imtiaz. It's good to see you. What happened exactly today?
Pakistan military engaged in an ongoing battle against insurgents, terrorists, including TTP and Taliban, since decades. Terrorist extremists using exploit Afghanistan border, Iran border, and India border against Pakistan. For decades, Pakistan military fought, and Pakistani nation has sacrificed a lot for the national security, for the world peace, for the long-term peace, for the world, for the Pakistani nation has sacrificed a lot. Pakistani nation believe in the peace and stability. This region is very important. If you know better about it, in the 90s, 80s, Soviet and Afghan Mujahideen war, there was extremism, there was terrorism. It is still terrorism and extremism. It is sponsored, supported by a lot of, Afghanistan and India. There is a lot of people who support or they are targeting and they suicide bombing in Pakistan. Pakistan suffered a lot, and Pakistan military combat this terrorism bravely is have been fighting since a long and for a decade.
Well, these separatists, they claim that they are targeting assets belonging to China because China is investing heavily in its Silk Road project across Pakistan. What do you make of these demands? Why are they targeting the Chinese projects like this?
Because, there is a democracy in Pakistan. This is a propaganda. Chinese, there is a project, there is Chinese government. Pakistan is a democratic country. There is a democracy. There is a legitimate government. There are courts. There are the constitutions. These are separatists. They are supported. They are funded, by India and Afghanistan. They are targeting innocent people. They are innocent civilians. They are targeting innocent people, sir. Or there is also extremism. They are supported extremism. They are targeting, really religious persons. They are targeted. They are saying there is they are deprived. They are resources. This is not resources. They are not looking for resources. They are funded. They are targeting innocent people. There are a lot of people. There are a lot of political parties. They fight for elections. They are in assemblies. They fight for for democracy. They are political parties. They are politicians in Balochistan. This is a very important province in Pakistan. They believe in a democracy. They believe in constitutions. Pakistan military is not against anyone. They are not targeting any civilians.
Well,
they believe in a dialogue.
I think we can agree it was a terrible terrorist attack, whatever the reasons the terrorists are trying to claim was their motivation. So our sympathies with the victims of that. We appreciate it, Imtiaz. Thank you very much indeed, Imtiaz Mir there, over in Karachi. Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's show. Thanks for watching. Stay with us. Benita Levine is up next with the rundown. Good night.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Khaled Ben David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on I-24 News.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Qatar going to kick Hamas out of Doha? Why is it suspending its supposed mediation role? And what can Egypt and the US do now to try and secure a ceasefire hostage deal 400 days into the war? We take a deeper look at efforts to end the war and to bring all the Israeli hostages back home. Graphic, disturbing footage is made public showing Hamas interrogators torturing Palestinians at one of the terror group's bases in Gaza. We speak to a security expert about these images recorded over several years. The footage retrieved from Hamas computers during IDF raids in Jabalia. And it's a show of unity by the Jewish community in the United States. Tens of thousands of people taking part in a solidarity rally in support of Israel days after the historic US presidential election. I24 News is in DC with the latest. This is the rundown on I24 News. I'm Vanessa Levine. 400 days in terror captivity, and one of the main mediators drops a diplomatic bombshell. Qatar suspending its supposed mediation role between Israel and the Hamas terror group, citing a lack of willingness by the sides to reach a ceasefire agreement. The Foreign Ministry in Doha announcing that they had notified parties 10 days ago during the last efforts to reach a deal. There are also conflicting reports that the Hamas political office in the Qatari capital has been closed, with some officials hitting back at claims that this was due to pressure from the United States. Doha is denying it's kicked Hamas officials out of the country. So what does this all mean for the hostages held in captivity in Gaza since the Hamas terror onslaught on the 7th of October? Thousands of Israeli demonstrators taking to the streets overnight, calling once again for leaders to seal a deal to bring the hostages home. Arlen Plachmeier has the details.
Qatar has confirmed that its ceasefire mediation efforts are currently stalled. A statement released by the Qatari Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that the state of Qatar will not accept that mediation be a reason for blackmailing it, as we have witnessed manipulation since the collapse of the first pause and the women and children exchange deal, especially in retreating from obligations agreed upon through mediation and exploiting the continuation of negotiations to justify the continuation of the war to serve narrow political purposes. The Foreign Ministry also denied earlier reports that the country has told the Hamas leadership to leave Qatar per US request. On Sunday, thousands took to the streets of Tel Aviv, marking 400 days since the October 7 onslaught and mass abduction, and demanding the release of all of the hostages.
We have reached the unimaginable 400th day that our loved ones are held captive in the hell that is Gaza. They are still there because of Benjamin Netanyahu. After 400 days, it is time to clearly state on every stage and every media outlet, the war in Gaza must end and all our hostages must be brought home.
Qatar withdrawing is, for us, is a chaos because they were the lead connection to the Hamas leadership in Qatar and the Hamas leadership in Gaza. And now without them, we don't know who's going to be in charge of this.
A hostage relative called on President-elect Donald Trump during the rally to use his influence and save the hostages even before he takes office in January.
The Israeli government gave up on the hostages, and you, the incoming President of the United States, are their and our last hope.
Even though Trump has repeatedly vowed during his campaign to make a swift end to the Gaza and Lebanon war, it's not an easy fix. And now with Qatar halting its mediation role and no replacement lined up, a hostage deal seems further out of reach than ever.
So for more reaction and insight, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangot, former military secretary to 3 Israeli defense ministers and a former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories in the IDF, and Michal Kotler-Wunsch, Israel's special envoy for combating anti-Semitism and a public policy and strategy advisor. Thank you both so much for being here. in studio with the rundown. And I want to start with you, Eitan. The timing of this announcement by Qatar suspending its role as media. Some would question how effective it really was as a mediator in the first place. Your thoughts?
Maybe I will surprise you. I don't see Qatar breaking all its rules and the involvement in this case. I think it's a step to press Hamas because Hamas is behaving like nothing happened. Hamas is really fully beaten by the IDF in Gaza. They lost and they are in a very deep pressure in the north part of Gaza. And the fact that they lost all their leadership in Gaza, especially, of course, Sinwar, changed the picture, and they behaving our demands and making conditions for releasing of the hostages and to move on with the things like things are as normal. I think the step by Qatar is they coming to a conclusion or to understanding that they need to shake Hamas. Qatar will not give up so quick what they built for many years. They were invited by Israel as well. So Israel has to, first of all, to be blamed itself for this kind of involvement. And secondly, in this moment, I don't think it's serving Israel to lose Qatar as one of the main
mediators,
especially with Egypt together. I don't see Egypt alone succeed. Egypt has a lot of weight, but Qatar needs, and I think they will return after this kind of circle. Besides, did you see any change of the ideology of Qatar? Qatar is still have their ideology as the Muslim Brothers, the involvement, they pay the money, they will not like to lose their place in Gaza so quick for others. So I think it's a tactic step in order to create or to bring achievements without the fact they are aware that Trump is on the door. And they would like also to be aware to this kind of part, so it's serving their interest as well.
Timing certainly is interesting. Michal.
Just to add, Qatar, both in my role as Israel's special envoy and from an anti-Semitism perspective, but also having led the fight, the legal case and cause of 2 deceased soldiers, Hadar Golden and Oron Shaul, and 2 civilians, Avera Mengistu and Shamas Sayed. We mentioned 400 days, that 101 have been held. 4 of them have
Since
been held for more than 10
sure.
years. And I want to say, Qatar is the owner of Al Jazeera. Qatar last week, Paris Saint-Germain in the stands unrolled a free Palestine. Qatar has funneled billions into the American universities in which we have heard since October the 8th, 2023, from the river to the sea and glory to our martyrs. Qatar was never an honest broker. And I will share with you that in my first emergency trip to the United States after October the 7th, I met with the White House appointee for the issue of the American hostages. We can talk about the division of, according to passports. But when I did meet with him, I gave him all of the legal documents that we created for that golden case and cause. And it was a critical moment to hold Qatar to account and have Qatar, by the United States of America, and have Qatar make the decision on which side of the fence it is playing. It cannot continue playing both sides. From my perspective, it cannot continue fueling anti-Semitism that we are actually being attacked by on all 7 fronts of the State of Israel, and on the 8th front, which we will surely discuss, that is attacking Jews and Israelis around the world.
Something we will take a deeper look at later on in the broadcast. Stay with us, much more to discuss right now. I want to bring in for more reaction Gidi Grinstein, a former peace negotiator under Prime Minister Ehud Barak and founder of Root Group. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with your thoughts on Qatar's announcement. We're discussing here in studio that it's suspending its role as mediator in the ceasefire and hostage talks. Of course, Doha had taken on the role of negotiator while still playing host to Hamas leaders. How was this ever going to work? Your reaction?
So I think that Eitan Dangot alluded to this in his earlier comments. We're looking at a country that has taken the whole concept of being a frenemy, both a friend and an enemy of all of its neighbors, into a level of art. Qatar was hosted an Israeli diplomatic representative for many years. It was also the conduit to Hamas. It has Al Jazeera. It houses the largest American base in the area. It also hosted the Taliban. So they are playing both sides of the strategic equation, and they've been doing it. Obviously, they're outlet for Iranian money. So they've been playing both sides of the strategic equation, and I do not see that changing. Qatar is a small country surrounded by very, very significant adversaries, and that is their way. So they may lean one way or another way. They may lean on Hamas, they may veer toward Israel in another situation, but at the end of the day, their national security strategy is have their fingers in all pots, and I don't think that's changing.
Now there is no realistic communication channel for any talks, though. Can Egypt or the US help secure a deal? The pressure certainly on from the Biden administration, because obviously it would be a fabulous way for President Joe Biden to end his term. Your take on the likelihood of a deal being secured soon?
So I'm very skeptical about the deal being secured soon, but we have to understand that the entire strategic makeup in the region is changing in front of our eyes. First and foremost, Iran is very vulnerable, and we're looking at a historic opportunity to take out the Iranian nuclear project. That should be, and probably is, the number one agenda in the discussions between Netanyahu and Biden and Netanyahu and Trump and right now. Related to that is the arrangements with Lebanon. And related to that, if Trump plays, I believe, both sides of his leverage, then he can push Israel into a set of arrangements that will allow a diplomatic transition from the stalemate that we see in Gaza. First and foremost, these ideas have been out there. Gaza has to be ruled by managed by an international force, and that international force with UAE leadership, they have been very clear and consistent since day one. They're only coming in at the invitation of a legitimate Palestinian entity, the PLO or the PA, which basically means that the PA has to be kind of brought in, obviously reformed, obviously upgraded, but they have to be brought into Gaza again, which will require dividing Gaza in some sort of an arrangement into Area A and Area B. I can go into all the details, but the point is that Trump, in this kind of magnificently unique way, unique set of circumstances, I would say, has the ability now to shape all three major theaters relating to the conflict in Gaza, in Lebanon, and in Iran. And if he plays his team, and together with the Biden team, by the way, if they play their cards right, we could see dramatic change in the next few weeks.
Appreciate your insights. Gidi Grinstein, thank you so much for being with us on The Rundown.
Thank you very much for having me.
Michal Kotler-Wunsch, I can see you want to respond.
I just wanted to follow up on that and say, look, we're going back a little bit to the October 6th conversation, I believe. I think that there is a major paradigmal collapse that we would be remiss if we did not pay attention to at this moment. And it is actually the collapse of the narrative that said we can integrate the Islamic Republic of Iran into the region. Right. That and all of its proxies, of course, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iraq, all of whom have been firing at the state of Israel not only on October the 7th, but since October the 8th in this multi-front war. It is the most critical moment. And just to follow up on what Gidi said, look, there is this incredible sort of, I'm going to say, maybe a glimpse of hope at this moment in the paradigmal shift, because the Abraham Accords actually flipped for the first time in history the paradigm of the three no's of Khartoum: no to recognition of Israel, no to negotiation with Israel, no to peace with Israel, flipping the paradigm in a historic pivot that said the following: yes to recognition of what the state of Israel is as a first step to negotiation of coexistence, and finally, ultimately paving the path to peace. Now, we have seen those Abraham Accord countries very quiet, while in democracies, in Western democracies around the world, the United States, Canada, and Europe, in this year-long war, we have seen, as I said, protests from the river to the sea. In those Abraham Accord countries and their representatives, we have seen actually, again, from my perspective of anti-Semitism, the understanding of anti-Semitism as a danger, as an indicator, as perhaps the most important diagnosis of extremism that threatens those Abraham Accord countries and all of us. Now, if we do enable that prospective paradigmal shift to happen now, including saying to the PA, because it's for all peoples of the region, first you have to recognize Israel's right to exist as what it was founded to be, the nation state of the Jewish people, an indigenous people returned after millennia of exile and persecution, not a 76-year-old creation of the UN, as we were recently told by President Macron. Recognition of the state of Israel will enable the negotiation of the coexistence, ultimately, indeed, paving the path to peace. That is a historic pivot, and in many ways, perhaps that is maybe the silver lining of what we have seen in the devastation of the last year of a raging multi-front war.
Briefly.
One remark. I think Qatar has a great achievement because Qatar is the investor for what you are now facing all over the world. The aid to Israel, the aid to Zionism, the aid for being a Jew. And if you ask me what is Qatar doing in Gaza, it's only from the tactic way. They will not lose what they built for many years, like we are looking on Iran, on the terror ring to surround Israel. Qatar has built it all over the global world, wherever they can, even in the United States, as the capital for what they are doing now. So I don't have any expectation from Qatar in this moment. Only it's a tactic way, but we have to be smart in order to succeed with Trump and the new atmosphere in the area in the Middle East, to create a new also future for what's going now all over the world against us in such a way.
Stay with us. We're going to bring in another voice. We welcome retired Colonel Rich Oateson, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and a geopolitical consultant. He joins us live from Washington. Thank you so much for your time. You're hearing the conversation. The U.S. reportedly pressuring Israel and Qatar for a ceasefire. But given that Qatar is suspending its role as mediator, how do you see it all unfolding? What do you make of the potential pressure out of the U.S. right now?
Well, it's good to be with you, first of all. Second of all, the record of the U.S. exerting pressure on various parties over the last year has been pretty spotty, shall we say. You have voices, of course, on the left of the spectrum in the U.S. calling for Washington to pressure Israel, for instance, to allow greater amounts of humanitarian aid to flow in. That's been a major focus of the Biden administration. And the ebb and flow of aid access really has not responded that much, in my view, to that pressure, but more to Israel's own assessments of when it can and should let more aid in to avoid reinforcing Hamas's hand. Now, the Trump factor is interesting because Trump does have excellent bona fides, of course, as a supporter of Israel, and actually a much clearer and greater willingness to use pressure on all parties. Now, Trump is well disposed towards Qatar. It's a major non-NATO ally. So if there is anyone who has the prospect of pressuring both sides simultaneously, and I wouldn't take too seriously this idea that Qatar has suspended its mediating role, because that role will continue in one form or another. It's kind of how the Qataris do business. I think it's an intriguing possibility that Trump might actually have greater success once he's in. The question is, what is the Biden administration going to try to do with the 2 months that it has left?
Well, that certainly is the major question. And a clear message from Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin to his new Israeli counterpart, Israel Katz, during their first phone call in recent days, saying exactly what you alluded to, that Israel risks jeopardizing ongoing U.S. weapon support if it doesn't increase humanitarian aid into Gaza. Given the time between now and the 20th of January, how do you see that relationship, so to speak, and that pressure unfolding?
Well, first of all, I don't think any U.S. president, Democrat or Republican, in normal times would suspend arms shipments to Israel. Look, even if you wanted to stop the fighting in Gaza, which the Biden administration clearly does, and most rational people want it to come to an end, Israel still has severe multiple threats from Hezbollah in Lebanon, from the Houthis, from Iran itself. So at some point to say, because of this one front that you're fighting in, we're going to suspend or meter arms, that's not going to be popular with the U.S. Congress. And I don't think there's a majority in either party. So I don't take that threat at face value. But we have to remember that this foreign policy team of the Biden administration overlaps quite a bit with the foreign policy team of the second Obama administration. And what did they do on the way out the door in late 2016 and early 2017 is they did some symbolically significant things in terms of not vetoing a UN resolution condemning Israel. So maybe some symbolic suspension of or delay of arms might be in the cards. I do think it's likely the Biden administration tries to send some symbol of disapprobation and unhappiness with Israel's, to date, failure to produce a realistic political strategy for ending the part of the war in Gaza. But I don't think that's going to be that damaging a blow. And I think, frankly, the Netanyahu government will wait that out, if that pressure comes, until Trump comes in, and perhaps would be more inclined to try to give Trump a win anyway when he comes in by ending the fighting then.
Retired Colonel Rich Oateson, always appreciate your insights. Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, live from D.C. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Michal Kotler-Wunsch, you are nodding throughout that discussion. Tell us more. What are you thinking?
Well, the humanitarian piece is actually a really important one. Of course, the humanitarian piece is just an indication or a symptom of international law and its institutions and its infrastructure that has been systematically co-opted and weaponized to demonize and delegitimize and apply double standards to the state of Israel, the Jew among the nations, if you will, which is precisely why we see anti-Semitism or the tsunami of anti-Semitism in response to what we have seen, including, we know, the ICJ and the ICC and so forth. The danger of the blood libel that has been actually over and over again repeated of Israel as starving, of Israel as preventing humanitarian aid, when we know that hundreds of trucks are awaiting, actually. And the problem is, of course, Hamas, a genocidal terror organization for whom human tragedy is the strategy. So it's a win-win situation in which Israel is not only blamed for humanitarian crisis, but then they benefit from the fact that they withhold the food or whatever else is waiting, and, of course, shoot at humanitarian corridors, prevent the use of humanitarian corridors. The importance of the false moral equivalence, of which the humanitarian aid is just a piece, is actually a critical piece of understanding for the state of Israel of what I call the Eighth Front. This Eighth Front that has been raging for decades, from the 1975, when we just marked 49 years, to Patrick Moynihan, the United States ambassador to the UN's important speech with the Zionism is Racism resolution that passed there, an obscenity of which we are still paying the price of. Because if Zionism is racism, and as he said at the time, if Nazism is racism, then Zionism is Nazism, and here we are at 2024. The importance of understanding that this is a war front, that the state of Israel has to actually engage in, understanding that international law, including humanitarian aid and so forth, that you receive or give by power of international humanitarian law, is something that hopefully will actually prompt the state of Israel to take a much more active role in this war front, which we have not engaged in consistently for decades.
And talking about the impact and how things are developing abroad as well, I want to turn our attention to Europe now, where Dutch authorities are meeting with Jewish organizations this week to address the growing concern of anti-Semitism in the Netherlands. This, of course, after the horrific mob attacks on Israeli soccer fans in Amsterdam on Thursday night, which shocked the European country and the world. Senior correspondent Bianca Zanini has this wrap. Take a look.
The shocking images that went viral this weekend, showing large groups of men violently and repeatedly attacking Israeli soccer fans in Amsterdam. 5 people were hospitalized, and riot police had to intervene several times, including to protect the Israeli supporters and escort them to their hotels. Israel sent 2 planes to the Netherlands to bring the Israeli fans home.
But it was very frightening. I saw people get beaten. I saw people get inside hotels and lock themselves. I saw people throw people into the water, the freezing water, and they drove on people, they stabbed people. And it was like 1940, the 1940s.
Israeli, Dutch, and European leaders quickly condemned the clashes, calling them anti-Semitic. Dutch authorities said 62 people were arrested, 4 are still being detained, and they expect more arrests as investigations continue. Israeli intelligence had reportedly warned Dutch security services of a heightened security threat against Israeli soccer fans in the city.
A full investigation will take place in the Netherlands on the question if the Dutch authorities, if we as Dutch authorities acted properly. So we will evaluate the situation and what happened.
The Israeli soccer fans were seen singing and chanting slurs. The Israeli embassy said mobs were seen kicking, beating, and even running over Israeli citizens, and they yelled anti-Israel slurs in attacks described as hit and run.
Let's say that I'm ashamed that this happened in the Netherlands, and it's a terrible anti-Semitic attack, and we will not tolerate, and we will prosecute the perpetrators, and I'm deeply ashamed that it could happen in the Netherlands in 2024.
While many condemned the violence, others were quick to add a political comment verging on an excuse.
I do not support any violence. I reject that. But then again, I reject every form of violence, also the violence in Palestine.
On Monday, Dutch authorities will begin discussions on the attacks and on the issue of anti-Semitism in the Netherlands, before meeting with Jewish organizations throughout the week to address their concerns.
We'll be getting insights from our panel here in studio, and I'm going to start with you, Michal Kotler-Wunsch, Israel's Special Envoy for Combating Anti-Semitism. It's difficult to process these images unfolding in Amsterdam in 2024.
So, Benita, we have to be very clear. They are shocking pictures, but they should not be surprising. What we have seen, not just in the last year, but in the last decades, including, for example, Anne Frank's memory and posters being flown around Amsterdam with Free Palestine in a keffiyeh, the understanding that what we spoke about before, the co-opting and the weaponization, including of the Holocaust itself, including of the memory of Anne Frank in none other than Amsterdam, and that this is not a single event. What we have seen since October 7th, which we actually marked 86 years to Kristallnacht, but it was October 7th that was the Kristallnacht of our time, as I said in the UN 1 month after. October 7th was the Kristallnacht. And the question is, what came after Kristallnacht? And what has come after, systematically and around the world, is the silence of many, many countries and UN institutions, of denial, of justification, and of attack of Jews. But that is precisely what we saw, not just on the streets of Amsterdam the other night, but in the responses to what we saw on the streets of Amsterdam, including the justification piece, which this was a premeditated and planned attack. So if anybody did anything inappropriate, of course, they should be held to account. But that is not why there was a pogrom on the streets of Amsterdam the other night. And the fact that we separate it and look just at Amsterdam singularly and don't actually factor in that in Washington, the only kosher restaurant, actually on the night of Kristallnacht's windows were crashed, that in New York City, a little boy was grabbed from his father's hand by a passerby who just happened to be on the way to synagogue, that in Chicago, once again, there was another demonstration, protest outside of a synagogue, and I failed to mention Montreal and Toronto and Sydney, and so many other events in what is a tsunami of anti-Semitism in response to the worst attack of Jews since the Holocaust. So this is just part and parcel of what we have seen throughout the year, and it is critical that we underscore, including when we hold governments to account and whatever Amsterdam will do, including law enforcement. There is a definition of anti-Semitism, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, that enables to identify this strain of anti-Semitism, that is anti-Zionism, that denies Israel's very right to exist. That is what we see. That is why those that were thrown into the river or kicked to bloody whatever were asked to say Free Palestine. The importance of identifying this strain of an ever-mutating virus that is anti-Semitism, and this strain is anti-Zionism, that denies Israel's right to exist, can only be done with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, the result of a long democratic process that has been adopted by many countries. And actually Amsterdam and my colleague Edo Verdonner in the Netherlands is about to roll out a strategy for combating anti-Semitism. Without the IHRA definition, any national strategy will not be able to be effective.
Well, that strategy clearly is so important because it's not often that Israel has to send rescue planes to bring citizens home. And Eitan, in this particular case, Israeli intelligence officials had warned Dutch authorities about tensions over this potential game.
Let's call it yes and no. But I think that the writing is on the wall. I spent 3 years of my life in Netherlands as the Israeli military attaché. And first of all, we have to put a very clear finger towards the Dutch government, the Dutch authorities in Amsterdam. I know by myself that if you want, all Amsterdam can be full with policemen till the last supporter is coming back safely to his hotel. And there is a fault here. And in this fault is an empty place where Dutch, as the one who missed this opportunity, has to be the first to lead it. Also, we have something to tell them about the Second World War, about the behavior. And in my opinion, the next step will be, for example, coming Thursday in Paris, while Israeli national football team will be hosted by France. And I see that Macron made a statement that he will be in the stadium. That is not enough. The weakness in Europe, and I was in Netherlands, the next station will be not Jewish, not Israeli. It will be the Dutch civilians themselves that will be beat by those groups because they open doors, a lot of mistakes has been done towards those immigration that came and got all the opportunities like they are local people. They are now paying the price, and they are afraid. They are afraid to fight against it. They are a risk to the independence of Europe itself.
Just to add one more thing, we cannot anymore accept only condemnations or words. There need to be actions, and I agree with Eitan. There has to be action of governments, of legislatures, of law enforcement mechanisms, and to remind everybody that anti-Semitism is just a predictor. It predicts the collapse of the spaces and the places in which it is allowed to permeate, to spread, to infect over thousands of years. That is why we always say the proverbial canary in the mine shaft. This anti-Semitism predicts the collapse, including of European countries, including in the United States of America and Canada and other countries. And the responsibility and the imperative to hold to account all of the countries, places and spaces, universities and stadiums, and all of the areas in which anti-Semitism has been allowed to run rampant is not just a Jewish issue, and it's not just an Israel issue. It needs to be something that we hold those governments to account and ensure that indeed that IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism is implemented and that there is action and not just words.
And we're going to take a deeper look at some of the developments in the US on that very issue. So stay with us. There is still much more to unpack. Right now, though, here in this part of the world, the following footage may be difficult to watch. Hamas torturing Palestinians at one of the terror group's bases in Jabalia. The IDF posting a 46-minute video in which Palestinian detainees are severely abused at the base called Outpost 17. Some are shackled, some are whipped. The footage goes on for hours. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Oseran has more in this report.
Shackled, with hoods on their heads, and beaten with rubber hoses. This is how Hamas brutally tortures its own civilians in the Gaza Strip. The IDF released 46 minutes of footage it found in a Hamas internal security compound in northern Gaza's Jabalia, documenting severe abuse of Palestinians under their rule. The materials, dated between 2018 and 2020, reveal Hamas's brutal methods of interrogating civilians while violating the human rights of Palestinians suspected of dissent or collaboration with Israel. Over the past year, there have been increasing testimonies by Gazans who were tortured by Hamas's internal security.
فاتفاجأت أول ما دخلت في المستشفى في القسم الغربي أخذوني جوا وعذبوني وبهدلوني وضلوا يضربوا فيا بالبرابيش وعلقوا إيدي وعلقوا رجلي في.
It is unclear why the men in the footage were being held, but human rights groups have long warned of abuses by Hamas against Gaza's civilian population, whether suspected for collaborating with Israel or for homosexuality, which in Gaza could be punishable by death. 2 years ago, I-24 News brought an exclusive testimony of a young Gazan who fled to Turkey after being tortured by Hamas for being gay.
أكتر أنواع التعذيب يعني في نوع من التعذيب اللي يرفع رجليا حط عصاية بينهم يضربوا على رجليا وحصل بعد كمان سنة كل مرة كانوا يعتقلوني كانوا يقوموا بتعذيبي بنفس الطريقة.
In recent months, there has been a surge of videos emerging from Gaza of Hamas's abuse and brutality against its own people. Whether to prevent theft of aid or to clamp down its rule, Hamas's brutality knows no boundaries, including against its own suffering people.
Still in studio, Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangot, and Michal Kotler-Wunsch, Israel's Special Envoy for Combating Anti-Semitism. Eitan, the severe abuse at this base called Outpost 17, difficult to watch. Hamas torturing Palestinian detainees. Your response?
I'm not surprised, unfortunately, and I'm telling it to you with all the responsibility because we know who is Hamas and which wing they are represent and what the way they build their entity inside Gaza, and the world is forgot it. It's very easy to blame Israel with humanitarian issues and other things, and when on your back there is such cases as you see, and I would like to tell you that this is the light way of what Hamas is doing. And what you expect from other organizations like Hezbollah or the others that are behaving towards the population. You heard what happened in Syria. We are not in a fair, let's call it, way or game in the world. It's very easy to come to point on Israel, and then when you have this, you see the easy way and the way the world is behaving towards such movements. Instead of such activities, we need to move them outside from our life, from the area. The problem is that the population in Gaza is, a lot of them are identified with Hamas. Secondly, those who are not are living as in frightened. I don't have any expectations that they will bring the new way of life to Gaza as we are looking for a partner to live. And on the other end, this kind of movements like Hamas, Iran, or the other organizations, or Muslims, extremist Muslims, like Muslim Brothers that are using this kind of ideology, they don't understand anything besides the way you have to fight it. You have to cooperate, the global cooperation against it. Without it, we will not succeed to reduce it, only probably in our activities.
I need to reiterate that these images, this footage first appeared in the Daily Mail, and just a short while ago, Hamas responding saying these videos are fabricated. Michal is not surprised.
Yeah, not surprising at all, of course, and in many ways that is actually the modus operandi, right? And blaming, of course, Israel or the Mossad or whoever it is that we can, the Jew, for what all the evils of the world. But I want to say what that footage actually exposes beyond Hamas, a genocidal terror organization that in its charter, like Mein Kampf, is actually committed to the annihilation of the State of Israel and murder of Jews. Hamas, but one proxy of a murderous Islamic regime in Iran. What that actually exposes is the hypocrisy of alleged human rights activists marching and encamping and protesting on the streets of New York City, of Montreal, of Berlin, of Sydney, Australia, that hold up signs that say LGBTQ plus for Gaza. Because if anybody cares about the Gazans, they would be calling to free the Gazans from Hamas. If anybody cares for the people of Lebanon, they would be calling to free the people of Lebanon from Hezbollah, but another genocidal terror army proxy. If anybody cares for the people of Iran, who've been betrayed by the West over and over and over again, despite the heroism of the people of Iran, the women of Iran, but betrayed over and over again because those marching in the alleged name of human rights, if they're not out on the streets tonight calling for the immediate freedom of Gaza from Hamas or the people of Iran from the genocidal Islamic regime of Iran, then it is just hypocrisy. And we understand that those demonstrations and encampments and protests, they're not pro-Palestinian, and they're not pro-Lebanese, and they're not pro the people of Iran. They are pro-terror. They are pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah, pro-Iran, and they are anti-Semitic. They are anti the state of Israel. They are not protests of love, they are protests of hate. And the proof in the pudding, if you will, is that we will see no protests after this footage is released. And of course, Hamas will deny. But my bone to pick is not with Hamas or the genocidal terror, other terror proxies of Iran. My bone to pick is with democracies and the institutions like the UN and like UNRWA and like UNIFIL, who were mandated and entrusted to uphold, promote, and protect the people of Gaza, of Lebanon, of Iran, and have failed colossally. And all of the democratic countries that fund UNRWA and UNIFIL and the UN have failed those peoples colossally, and that is the moment that we should actually be focused on. And I agree, we can only be doing that together with the democracies that are not only entrusted, but actually responsible to protect those people.
Just to add one sentence, and also, it's including moderate Arab countries.
That's right.
Which are suffering and afraid from this kind. And to close you the circle, you start this show with talking about Qatar. And I told you about sponsoring. So at the end, the circle is closed, and you understand what's going inside it, and it's very difficult because the money that is invested by those countries like Qatar or those countries who support this kind of, call it the terrorism or a way that we are not accepting it, is taking place everywhere. I don't see laws that are really prevent from Qatar to invest in Columbia University or in other places.
Right. That's right. And that is what we call the Red-Green Alliance, right? The radical left and the radical Islamists intersect, and they intersect at anti-Semitism. That is the importance of it being used as a predictor.
So worrying again in 2024. Stay with us. We've got more to discuss. Right now, we ask, how do Israelis feel about the war against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon? Well, the terror group has been showing its solidarity with Hamas in Gaza since the 8th of October, as we've been discussing, the day after the Hamas terror rampage in southern Israel. More than 60,000 people have been evacuated from their homes for more than a year now. The Israel Democracy Institute's October 2024 Israeli Voice Index finds 46.5% of Israelis believe Israel should pursue a diplomatic agreement with Hezbollah. 46% of those surveyed believe Israel should continue fighting to put an end to that daily rocket fire at northern Israel. Around 7% said they were not sure. So let's find out exactly what's happening on the ground. We go live to correspondent Zach Anders. He joins us from northern Israel, and a major Israeli strike in Beirut earlier in the day. The health ministry in Lebanon says at least 20 people killed in a village north of the capital. What is the latest? What is confirmed? Tell us more, Zach.
Hi, Benita. First, apologies. I'm getting over a bit of a cold. I want to start with some breaking news that Khan, the public broadcaster here in Israel, has broken within the last 20 minutes. Herzi Halevi, the chief of staff of the IDF, approving, according to Khan, an expansion of the ground maneuver in southern Lebanon. Now, this was something that we've long speculated was coming to a head, that there was an impasse within the political decision-making process, that the point now with the IDF having success in these, essentially the first stage of their mission, get into these villages and towns that are closest to the border, destroy the Hezbollah infrastructure, and gauge the level of success in doing so. Well, they have had an incredible amount of success by all accounts, based on what I have seen being inside Lebanon with the IDF. It does appear that there was minimal resistance in context, in comparison to what Hezbollah, the kind of fight they could have put up a year ago. But obviously the number of measures and the different ways, the creative ways that they were cut down seriously degraded their ability to be able to fight, to coordinate, to host combat defensively in these areas of southern Lebanon, allowing the IDF and ground forces to roll through. The question then became, do you continue to advance and push farther north and attempt to create a deeper, wider buffer between that border, or do you head all the way to the Litani? We still don't know whether or not that is a decision or a possibility that is on the table. But again, what Khan, the public broadcaster here in Israel, is reporting tonight is that the IDF chief of staff has issued an approval to expand the ground campaign. We don't know what that looks like, how large of an expansion this goes. I mean, we already have multiple reservist brigades that have been called into action here in this arena. So that will be something certainly to watch out for, Benita. But real quickly, just to highlight what we have been seeing across not just Lebanon and Beirut, those strikes north of the city, like you mentioned. There's also strikes in Syria. It appears consecutive strikes on an apartment block inside Damascus, the capital of Syria. Appears to be a high-value target attempt there, with multiple casualties reported through Syrian state television. So a very busy night in Lebanon and in Syria. Here in northern Israel today, 6 people were wounded in multiple different attacks. 3 people wounded in Nahariya. They arrived to the hospital on their own. And 3 others wounded in Metula. Now, given that this is a completely evacuated military zone, at this point we don't have any confirmation whether or not the 3 wounded there are civilian or IDF. But again, considering it's a closed military area, it's less likely to find civilians there at this time. So we'll continue to track on that. But all in all, the number of rockets fired and the drone attacks, relatively light day in comparison. We don't have an updated number yet from the IDF. but certainly far less rocket fire that we've noticed today in comparison to days prior.
Well, that certainly is a relative concept given the daily rocket fire drone attacks out of southern Lebanon. Correspondent Zach Anders live from northern Israel. Feel better. Thank you very much for the update. Now to the United States, where the Jewish community is holding a rally in the U.S. Capitol to show support for Israel, days after the historic presidential election, which of course saw Donald Trump cruising to victory, securing another 4 years in the White House. The Jewish Federations of North America and the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish American Organizations hosting an event called Stand Together, showing unity, strength and resilience in partnership with dozens of other national and local organizations. So for the latest, we go live to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. He's in Washington. And Mike, of course, this event not only happening days after the presidential election there, but also it marks 1 year since the historic March for Israel following the October 7th terror rampage in southern Israel. What is happening there in D.C.? What can you tell us?
That's right. Jewish communal leaders figuring this is a good time right now, as good as any, to try to once again bring together the Jewish community. You mentioned not only a year after the National Mall rally, but obviously very divisive times as of late within the Jewish community in terms of the elections, Democrats, Republicans, everything in between. There was a lot of back and forth on social media between the various organizations. Time again to bring everybody together. Right now we've got the pre-show going on here. If I can step out of the way, have enough room to. That's Ada Pasternak up there right now, a Jewish singer-songwriter performing her song 100 Days as the crowd here at the Nationals Park fills into the baseball stadium. This is just the pre-show, which started about 45 minutes ago. The main show will get underway at 3 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Israel time. It'll all be live streamed. There'll be a number of speakers here throughout the main event, several members of Congress, Jewish heroes, including those from the war in Gaza telling their story. We'll likely hear from the hostages' families as well. Variety of different speakers from across the spectrum and denominations, making sure that every organization, every point on the Jewish spectrum feels represented out here, and that there is a true display of unity in quite divisive times. We spoke earlier with William Daroff, the CEO of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, about why it's so important right now to get that message across. Here's William Daroff.
It's been a tough time for the American Jewish community and for all Jews around the world since October 7th. And we've decided to come together as a Jewish community to show our unity after the divisiveness and the troubling year we've had, but also after the very difficult tension of the presidential election. We're past that, and we are still standing as a community, and we're still standing unified in support of a strong U.S.-Israel relationship, in support of unity of the Jewish community, and thanks to the American military and the American people for their support for Israel. And just coming together as one to say it's been a year and we're still standing.
And of course, Benita, everybody trying to figure out right now who is going to be in the Trump administration. Will he have a Jewish influence like he did the first time around? What are the challenges going forward for the Jewish community? We spoke as well with Eric Fingerhut, the head of the Jewish Federations of North America, a co-sponsor of the event today. They're holding their General Assembly throughout the week here this week. They'll host Isaac Herzog, the Israeli president, tomorrow. Here's our conversation earlier with Eric Fingerhut about the challenges ahead here for American Jewry with the turn of the election and the weeks and months ahead.
Well, we just know that we have a new Congress coming in, a new administration in the White House. It's a new school year on college campuses. There are still challenges in city councils and school boards. There's so much work we have to do. We are not at the end of this by a long shot. Israel needs our help and support, and so we don't know exactly what the next challenges are, but we know that this year coming up is as hard and difficult and challenging as the year we just passed.
Benita, there are no early indications about the attendance out here today, but obviously last year that rally on the National Mall drew a lot of eyeballs, a massive, massive turnout for that in the aftermath of the October 7th massacre. There's obviously been a lot of strain on the Jewish community since then, exhaustion in some respects. Should be interesting to see the turnout here today in Washington once again.
Live in Washington, thank you as always, senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim. More to come from Mike, of course, in the coming hours. Thanks, Mike. And still in Washington, a disturbing story. A popular kosher restaurant in D.C. vandalized on the weekend, its windows smashed. The incident taking place on the eve of the anniversary of Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, in which the Nazis terrorized Jews throughout Germany and Austria in 1938. But it's not 1938, it's 2024. And we now welcome Michael Chelst, the owner of the Char Bar. How horrific. Your restaurant targeted by vandals. I'm so sorry that this happened. Tell us more. What did, in fact, happen?
Yeah, it's a tragedy always for these things for the entire community. Certainly makes the people who work at Char Bar a little bit more nervous and stressed out. But on sometime late Friday night to early Saturday morning, someone or someone's picked up or brought with them these large cinder block bricks and chose to pick Char Bar as their place to vandalize and smash. As you can see in the pictures, fortunately, nobody was there. Nobody was physically injured on there or not. And we're open and, continuing to do what we do, which is to serve our Jewish community from both here local and from our visitors coming down to DC, as we've done for many years.
And to think this was on the 86th anniversary of Kristallnacht. Any arrests? What are authorities saying?
Yeah, I have a meeting with them again later this afternoon, but nothing, nothing specific and no real leads at the moment.
And I understand this isn't the first time that your restaurant has been targeted. Something similar happening back in June 2020. What happened then, and were there any arrests then?
Yeah, the time then, it was a little bit harder to say with confidence that it was definitely, hate-related, motivated. It was during the BLM riots. Again, we were the only restaurant on the entire, or venue on the entire block that was vandalized. And there are lots of glass and other restaurants and other stores right next door and things. So certainly it was likely that that was a similar kind of thing back that happened there. But because it was also in the middle of the Black Lives Matter movement, the riots that were happening then, it was a little harder to, it was hard to clearly state that. And at the time, we didn't push it as hard as letting people know and understand what's going on.
And I understand there is already fundraising and effort underway to help you and your team there as well. So hopefully when we're all next in Washington, we get to come and visit you there. But until then, very briefly, how is your community feeling? How are you feeling from a safety point of view right now?
Well, it's always been in the back of our head. These kind of things can happen just because we see and we read what's going on elsewhere in the country and in the world. We'll have to reevaluate again our security steps just to protect our people and let the customers and our employees know that they're in a safe space and that their security is taken care of. So it's a little bit of an uneasiness, but we will pursue and we will be here, and we have a goal, which is to provide support for people of all, of visitors, business people, politicians, 8th grade, 10th grade school trips from around the world in the U.S. And, I'm committed to keeping that here, and we're not going anywhere.
Michael Chelst, thank you so much for being with us on The Rundown, the owner of the Char Bar in Washington. Be safe, be well. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
How devastating. Michal Kotler-Wunsch, your thoughts?
So just to say, Benita, I've actually eaten there in Washington after the last rally that was held in the mall, where there were hundreds of thousands of Jews that gathered. And we have to be very, very clear. This is a part of what I would call the mainstreaming of anti-Semitism. The targeting of the single kosher restaurant in Washington, D.C., the targeting of Jewish schools, the targeting of synagogues, the targeting of individuals. And the point is also to actually terrorize and instill fear and isolate, right? It's not just if nobody was hurt, well, then we move on. The mainstreaming of anti-Semitism that has actually been enabled by the silence, by the denial, by the justification, and by the continued lack of enforcement of rules, of policies. You asked, has anybody been arrested? In Amsterdam, there was no one arrested. Hopefully there will be some unrest in Washington. I remind us, Paul Kessler, who was shortly after October 7th hit on the head with a megaphone and killed. And I don't know if anybody was arrested since that. The imperative to understand, and this actually comes together with the coming together that they will be having a little later today. We are facing this as a people, whether we live in Israel or in Amsterdam or in Washington or in Montreal. The Jewish people are facing this tsunami of anti-Semitism together, because the same anti-Semitism that fueled the atrocities of October the 7th and fuels the multi-front war intent to annihilate the state of Israel since October the 7th is the anti-Semitism that fuels these attacks, is the anti-Semitism that fuels the fear that tells people to remove their kippot or move their mezuzot from their doors. Together, if we stand united, we are resilient. And as you said, 2024 is not 1944. We have sovereignty, we have a Jewish nation state, and we have half of us here and half of us in the rest of the world able to fight this together as a people, so long as we remain united and resilient in our fight to do so.
Michal Kotler-Wunsch, Major General in Reserves, Eitan Dangot, thank you both so much for being here in studio. As we said, 2024, so much to digest, not only here, but in Europe, in the US, around the globe. And that is a wrap for the Rundown for today. Back again tomorrow, same time, same place. I'm Bernice Levine, live in Tel Aviv. Thank you for watching.